And welcome back to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. Joining me is my co-host, Shayne Kubas, contributor for Still Curtain. We are coming off a win, something we haven't got to say very often this year, not since week one. We were on a 4-game losing streak, and all of a sudden, the Steelers come in and upset the Buccaneers in what was one of the biggest home discrepancies since 2005. I believe the biggest since 2005. The line finished at 9.5 points. Underdogs for the Steelers in this game. They were able to pull off the upset, and it was impressive, I have to admit, considering all the injuries that the Steelers had, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. For their defense to be able to play the way that it did, I was very pleased with it.
Yeah, and it's hard for me to disagree because, like, you look at just who the corners were even. Like, that was the biggest concern, obviously, was the secondary being pretty much out except for Terrell Edmunds as far as regular starters. For them to go up against, Mike Evans, and Godwin kind of got his later in the game, but still most of the game, he was really ineffective. Like, for them to play the way they did and give the offense a chance and the rest of the defense a chance and not get burned in the passing game was really probably the biggest surprise of maybe the whole weekend in the NFL.
Yeah, let's stay on that. Let's talk about the Steelers defense from this game. Just a collective team effort. Like, there's really nobody outside of, I did pick on Robert Spillane a little bit this week. According to Pro Football Reference, he allowed 5 of 6 catches for 69 yards. He did have a nice pass deflection.
Yeah.
Saved a big play there, but a little bit exposed. But I think the rest of it was great. Like, I think Hayward and Ogunjobi, the pressure that they were able to generate. Highsmith had the strip sack from the outside. I think Terrell Edmunds was outstanding. And I think this was one of his best games that I've seen him play. And this was without Minkah Fitzpatrick next to him and without Steelers' top 3 cornerbacks. And so for the Steelers to play against Tom Brady and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and find the success were able to defensively, they allowed 6.1 yards per attempt passing the ball. They only allowed 2.9 yards per carry rushing the football against the Buccaneers. And so just a collective team effort.
Yeah, and I think especially you already mentioned Edmunds. Like, he was the guy for sure that was kind of the glue of the whole secondary in this game. And with him, people have always underestimated him a little bit because he started off his career pretty poorly. He was a first-round pick, obviously, that probably shouldn't have been. Obviously, he's more of like a second or third-round player at the time he was drafted, at least. But I think he's developed into a guy that if you had taken him in the first round, he had played like this from the get-go, you wouldn't be at all concerned about him as a player. So I do hope that they look at this game and look at how he's played the past couple of years and do extend him long-term to play next to Minkah. And this game might be kind of the first stepping stone to getting that process started of saying, hey, we need to have this guy long-term.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there. I feel like Edmunds has such a bad stigma attached to his name because everybody thought he was a second or even third round prospect. I had him a 2-3 grade coming into that draft. And I think he was like my 84th overall player. So I had him down low, and boy, he's really exceeded all of our expectations. I just don't know what more he can do to change that stigma that is attached to him right now, because I think that he's heading for his 3rd really good season in a row. Now, Edmunds is never going to be a guy that gets the 4 to 6 interceptions. That's just not his game. He plays closer to the line of scrimmage. I do think that he's good in both coverage and especially in run support, but it's hard to sit here where we are right now and to be upset with him. And we can talk about the draft capital that was used on him. We can still disagree with it if we want to. I think he's coming close to, and he was the 28th pick, so it's not a high first-round pick we're talking about. He's coming close to at least salvaging that. I mean, if he was a second-round pick, I think nobody would have an issue at all right now. They'd be looking at him as this player's really good. He needs to get a second contract. But I think because it was that former first-round pick thing attached to his name, he gets a negative connotation. I don't think there's any way right now, though, and I thought about putting this on Twitter as well, but I don't think there's any way right now that you could argue that Najee Harris has been a better pick than Terrell Edmunds. So if you're knocking one, I feel like you got to knock the other. Like, Harris had the rushing yards, and he had the volume production in his first season, but he's never had the efficiency yet at all. And so I understand it took Edmunds a little while to get going here, and obviously things can turn around for Najee as well too. But if we're knocking one in the same breath, you have to knock the other one, because I mean, Edmunds has been the better player for sure, and the more important player, I would argue, because like we said last week, Jaylen Warren has done about as much as what Najee has done in that same situation. I'm not going to make this about Najee right now. We're going to talk about the defense. I just think I'm really surprised with Edmunds' performance.
Yeah.
It's been really
fun to watch.
Yeah, I hope that they can work something out with him after this season, because I think there's something to be said with continuity too at the safety position. Like having Minka and Edmonds there together, a pair of 25-year-old safeties, going to be 26 next season. I mean, those are guys that you want to have together long term. Like that's something that Polamalu and Clark had. They're not at that level, but it's still, I mean, foundational pieces for this team. Let's talk about our other winners from this game, just winners in general. We'll start with the winners and we'll get to the losers here. So Shane, who are your winners for this contest?
I think the big winner, and honestly, it's just in general the way that he's played so far this season. You have to really look at the way that excuse me, Edmonds overall. We talked about him at the start. He has been a guy that, with the injuries in the secondary now, and then even prior to that, you can just tell when he's on the field at this point in his career, even though he's never going to be an elite cover player necessarily, he's not going to, man up guys. He's not going to be this elite deep safety. There's something about this defense that just works better when he's on the field, even with Minka not there in this game. Obviously, he's the biggest piece in the secondary. He's going to be that guy because he has that free safety, like middle of the field ability. But things managed to still work even with just Edmonds in there. And it didn't really work when he wasn't in there. And I think there's a reason for that. Obviously, the Bills have a better passing game. They have a lot more going on. But the Bills ran roughshod over us in the run game, too. And I think a lot of that is Edmonds missing. His ability to make plays in the run game. And you saw it this game especially. Just the ability with his athleticism, especially for being a bigger guy. When he gets there, he really arrives. Like, he hurts people. You can tell guys don't want to get hit by him, and they don't want to have to deal with him in the box. And it makes the linebacker play not as big of a deal, even though it's been a little bit better this year, obviously, with Jack playing relatively well, and you have Bush showing up a lot more this year than he did last year. He's the glue guy for this defense, opposed to being the star. He's that guy that we've always needed to have on these defenses throughout the years that kind of makes everything work around him.
Yeah, I mean, Edmonds was a guy, when the Steelers drafted him, I wasn't opposed to even having him play linebacker if the Steelers were open to it, because 6'2", really long arms, big hands. I mean, the wingspan wasn't an issue. He was 217 pounds. And so in today's NFL,
that's not that light, honestly.
No, you can get away with that. And he's a phenomenal athlete. So I think it would have been almost more advantageous to have him in that situation. But I mean, I love him at safety now. And we play in the box. He's playing the run excellent, like you just talked about. And so just no issues at all with him whatsoever. I think he's incredibly smart to it, being able to diagnose and recognize the play. Like, he'll get right up there. He'll close in fast. And then you've noticed on the 2-point conversion attempt, he's the one that kind of like scooted Bush out there and said, hey, make sure we do that switch right here.
Get ready for this,
and then Bush goes and gets the pass deflection, which saves the game from tying and avoids overtime. And so I think Edmonds is just a really smart player who's made a lot of progress early in his career so far. I want to highlight Steelers backup cornerbacks. Like, I did not envision a scenario, and I know a lot of it is there was pressure on Tom Brady, and Tom Brady just didn't perform overly well, but I did not envision a scenario where Josh Jackson and James Pierre come into this game and are able to hold Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to just very little damage through the air. And so even if James Pierre, I believe that he was targeted 8 times, he allowed 2 receptions for 15 yards. I mean, that's just a phenomenal performance. And so I don't know if that's something that can be repeated. We've seen Pierre struggle at times, particularly with speed down the field. He's been beat in the past with that, but you have to look at it. And I want to pose this question as well for how good Pierre played in this game. And I thought it was very good. In the previous game, Levi Wallace surrendered over 100 yards and 105 passer rating. Now, that was to Josh Allen and the Bills. And so a very tough matchup, his former team. But is there like a power struggle here? Is there any way that Pierre should be like on the heels of Wallace, or is just Wallace the guy going forward?
I think the issue is like they're really not that dissimilar in terms of players. They're both corners who are athletically limited compared to most guys in their position. They're technicians. They're smarter players. That's how they win when they do. I think for especially Pierre, though, he's a little bit even more limited as an athlete. And I think in certain situations, like against a guy like Mike Evans, who he's not going to turn you around with a route. He's not going to do that stuff. He can run down the field, obviously, but he's more of a jump ball than a true just straight deep threat running down the field, unless he can get up to the build-up speed. It's just that was a good matchup for a guy like Pierre. If he can hang with a guy because he has the quickness to deal with them if they're not a quicker receiver, he can handle those matchups. I think moving forward, maybe when we play teams that have receivers in that mold, he could be the guy that you kind of designate as, follow him around a little bit, stay with him, because he's a very smart player. That's why he can play when he has the opportunity against certain players. But against most of the receivers in the NFL, especially number ones or even some high number twos, he probably just doesn't have the long speed to hang with a lot of them.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I don't think he's fooling anybody into believing that, oh, this is the guy, this is our corner we need to go with. I think between 10 and 15 yards is excellent. Yes. But when you get him in space and down the field, that's when the athletic struggles really come into play. I think it's worth noting that coming into the NFL, both James Pierre and Levi Wallace, these are 4'6" guys. I mean, these are not fast corners at all. And if you want to do the math, it's kind of sad, but Steelers, if you sit down and do it, their cornerbacks they're the slowest group in the NFL. And outside of Witherspoon, who's the only one with real size, length, and speed in the combination of the collection of those three traits. And so they need to get faster at this group eventually. I don't think that any of these guys are really long-term solutions that they have on the roster right now, but they're doing well enough in the situation. And when the pass rush comes back, like when TJ Watt is back in there and they're able to get a lot more consistent pass rush, I think the corners will be fine. I don't think their weaknesses will be as glaring or as noticeable. I want to talk about the offensive players that are winners here really quick too. Credit where credit is due. Mitch Trubisky played a great second half in this game. 9 of 12, 144 yards and a touchdown, averaged 12.7 yards an attempt. And a lot of that was on a blown coverage play where Levante David's there trying to call timeout. For some reason, Connor Hayward's running past him and he's still trying to call timeout. I'm not taking that away from Trubisky, but that's a 53-yard pass, most of it after the catch. But he played excellent, and he made some big-time throws. Having said that, we're going to talk about this quarterback controversy coming up here real soon and why it's not really a controversy. But I do want to give Trubisky props and Chase Claypool as well. I think this wasn't his best game statistically, but it was still a great game statistically. 7 of 7 for 96 yards and a touchdown. And it was all in big moments too, big third down plays. His ability to contort his body, he looked excellent. He didn't look like that player that was shying away from the ball or the one that we were questioning on the deep ball the other game with Pickett, why he didn't come back to the football. And we've seen him struggle down the field in some of those contested situations. He did not in this game. It was an encouraging sign for sure.
I think for me, I'll start with Trubisky first, just because this has been a big conversation. I understand he played probably the best half of football by any quarterback so far for us this year, right? Like that's I think I can say that even if you take that big play away. And that was obviously a blown coverage, and it was whatever. He found Hayward though, good job with that, and Hayward did a great job, taking it as far as he did. But I think ultimately the problem is, even if he would theoretically turn a corner a little bit, right? Like maybe he could play more like this the rest of the season. And we'll get into it with the quarterback situation more. Like he's still not this team's long-term answer, and they're still 2-4 at this junction. Like we're probably not saving the season truly. We're not going to go on a gigantic run. I doubt it, whether he plays well or not. So props to him, though. It was what we needed in that second half, and he got it done. And then Claypool, this is the type of game from him. And I talked about it in the Studs and Duds article that I do every week. He has these moments where you're like, this guy can be a top 15 NFL wide receiver. Like he has these moments where he catches the ball perfect in contested situations. He makes insane catches on the sidelines. He does all these things. He's so obviously the size, speed element's always been there. And then he has the games that are like the first 5 of this season where he doesn't really accomplish a whole lot. He doesn't run his routes well. He's just so inconsistent, and it makes it hard because you don't want to quit a guy that has his combination of size and speed and the glimpses of elite ball winning. Like you want that as even as a slot receiver, which is what he's tried to do for us this year. Even in that position, you still want a guy like that, but it's just not consistent enough. So I don't know what to make of him. I hope this is him turning a corner the rest of this year at least, but I'm not going to be surprised if they still, people might be calling about him still and they'd be listening.
Yeah, you would have to hope this is a step in the right direction. But again, in year 3 in the NFL, chances are he's probably not going to change a whole lot the player he is. He can still make improvements. He's still a young guy. But I think that what it seems like typically is those receivers who struggle either catching the football or struggle in contested catch situations and have these routine struggles, they kind of just don't seem to go away. Like I think that in terms of like Deontay Johnson, like I think drops are always going to be an issue for the guy. He catches as many tennis balls as he wants, but I think that drops are always going to be an issue. And it doesn't mean that he can't still be a good player. I mean, T.O. had drops as much as anybody, but I mean, those issues typically kind of follow you. And I'm not sure that Claypool's ever going to be a great route runner either. But there should absolutely be teams that are fielding some questions about him. I don't know if the Steelers would bite and all. They typically don't go that way. They don't like to go backwards. They don't like to get rid of their players for draft capital. They like to do it the opposite way. And so it doesn't really seem like a Steelers move, although I wouldn't be shocked if there were a few teams calling. Let's talk about the losers against the Bucs. I think that Dan Moore Dan Moore was okay. Kevin Dotson, excuse me, 3 penalties. It was just an inexcusable game. Now the death threats are way too far.
Insane.
I don't care if you're Trent Scott, Josh Scobie. I don't care who you are or what you've done on the Steelers. Nobody ever deserves to get a death threat because of a bad game that they've had. And I'm confident that Dotson can pick it back up again. He is that high variance guy we talked about a little bit ago. He can have these really lows and these really highs. Like as a rookie, he had 4 or 5 games where just as a stopgap guy coming in there, he looked really good. And so I don't think that Dotson, the sample that we've seen from him so far, I don't think that he's going to be that long-term answer at left guard for the Steelers. They're probably looking to replace him next year or the year after. But it's still possible that he can become a more consistent player and maybe that'll change. But Dotson had a really bad game. I mean, it's hard to point out a lot of negatives. I do want to say that I think outside of that first drive from Pickett, I don't think the sample that we saw in the first half was great. And again, I don't think that Canada's game plan was doing him a lot of favors, but I think he was to the tune of like 3.7 adjusted yards per attempt. And that is just not anywhere close to where you need to be. For reference, Tua on the season, who we're about to go up against, 9.2 adjusted yards per attempt this year. He missed the last 2.5 games with injury, but those first 3.5 games, whatever he played, I'm bad at math. He has 9.2 adjusted yards per attempt. That is an elite number. It's similar to what Joe Burrow had last year. 3.7 is like way down in the doghouse area. And so he's going to have to bring that number up. And again, we're going to talk about that quarterback controversy. There is no controversy, but that is something that we do need to see some improvements from Pickett. And I want to see that willingness to throw that ball over the middle of the field and to air it out and try to make plays. And if he's doing it against Canada and doing it on his own, then that's maybe what he's going to have to do. But those were a couple of big losers this week. I'm drawing a blank. Is there anybody else who just did not have a good week?
Just to touch on with Dotson, I think more and more, the more I see him, I think he feels more and more like a swing guard type of player, like long term. I don't think he's a true like starting caliber player and on a good offensive line at least.
Yeah,
right? He's good enough to start for you if you need someone to play, but I do think they're going to look to upgrade over him. I think Pickett, again, outside of that first drive, and I've talked about this a couple different times with Canada, but especially this past week when I did the quarterback report card for us, it feels like his offense is designed to in a way where if everything is perfect, or he expects everything to be perfect, and if it is, then he's going to say, oh, well, then we're doing the right things then. But this is the NFL, and even in college, you can't get away with asking your team to be perfect on every play. That's what he's basically asking to do, is catch every single ball, make every single read the first read correctly. The defense has to basically mess up almost too a little bit. Like that's what it feels like he's asking of these players. Like especially after that first drive, he just had no answer to move the football down the field. And Pickett is doing what he's supposed to do in this offense. They do believe that he's making the reads that he's supposed to make, but those reads get you 3.7 yards adjusted per attempt. And he does have to, I think, transcend this offense. I think he has to understand, like, hey, I'm going to have to make some plays here. And if Canada doesn't like it, then too bad. He probably isn't going to be here after this year anyway. Like that's the mentality I think he does. The only other thing I'll mention is the running game still just not getting going. I know this is the Buccaneers defense. They came in kind of in the middle of the pack, but we know what kind of rush defense they've always been the past couple of years. So I'm not that shocked by it. Harris at least looked a little bit healthier. I'm hoping that continues to happen. But this run game still just isn't getting going on a regular basis. Too many toss sweeps, by the way. Get that out of the playbook. Those little toss. We do not have the running back juice. Even Warren, who has a little bit more juice than I expect, not that type. We can't keep running back.
I agree. Those are almost always result in a negative play.
They got to be averaging like -3 yards per carry.
Yeah, and they're drive killers because when you get Najee tackled for a 5-yard loss because he doesn't have a lot of juice and the blocking's not great. I mean, that's a drive killer for a team who lives to get in third and manageable situations, which is what the Steelers offense is. And it's a terrible idea. You should try to be getting first downs on second down, but maybe that's just me. Let's go ahead and grade the Steelers quarterbacks real quick, and we're going to move on to our next topics here soon. You always write your quarterback grade article, so we'll start with you, Shane. How did you have Pickett graded in the first half before his injury, and then he left early in the second half, and then how did you have Trubisky graded in this one?
I had Pickett, I believe, with a C-. He just, again, he didn't move the needle for this offense. He did what he was asked to do, but it's more of the same thing where he's better at doing what he's asked to do than Trubisky's ever going to be, just because he's better. He reads the field better than Trubisky ever has. But when you run an offense like this and the way Cannon is calling it, that's not going to be enough, right? It just isn't, and it's hard to really blame Pickett for that, like we talked about, because he's just doing what he's asked to do based on the game plan. But when the game plan is as bad as it was, at some point he has to just say, you know what, screw this. I'm making a play. Like, I'm running outside the pocket. Someone get open down the field. That's kind of what he did that so well at Pitt his last year, especially. And I think he could continue to do that in the NFL. But he has to kind of take ownership of that if he wants to really move this offense consistently and get better at creating explosive plays. So I did give him kind of a middling grade for that performance. But then Trubisky, I mean, it's hard to give him anything, lower than like a B+. Like, I think he did pretty much everything you could ask him to do. There was a couple throws that were a little iffy when he first came out there, but he just came into the game, so I can't really blame him for that. But down the stretch, I mean, he was just money, and the receivers obviously helped out a lot, but he made the throws they needed to make and got them where the receivers could make plays. And converting 4 for 4 on 3rd and long in this offense, regardless of the situation, is hilarious to me, and I can't help but give him a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, definitely. I've got Pickett with a D+, and I know that sounds a little bit harsh on him, but just the 67 yards in a half of play plus. And I think the first drive was like to a T. Like, that's exactly how you want to execute that. From there, though, it was pretty bad, and the offense just couldn't get going. And again, a lot of this comes back on Canada. If you look at his heat map from Pro Football Focus in college, everything in the middle of the field. Like, this is where you want the guy operating, because he can read a defense and he can sling the ball over the middle, and he's willing to do so. But these routes are all designed to go to the outside. He's also good at throwing on the run. But the problem is he does it better in improvising situations instead of just doing that speed rollout that the Steelers have done like 18 times.
Oh, I love their speed rollout.
So, oh my goodness, that speed. If you want to scrap a play from the playbook, scrap that speed rollout, because that one bothers me so bad. It's like you'll do that on 2nd down. You should, like, I can understand that play on like 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, where it's like, boom, get the quick yards, pick up the chains. If you want to try it there and at least have another option you can go to. But when you do it on 2nd down, just to try to get yourself into like a 3rd and 6 situation, I'm like, come on, let's do something a little bit more creative, because they can see it coming. So
I want them at some point on that play. I just want to make a note of this. I want them to do that speed rollout, have the quarterback stop, set his feet, and throw like a screen back across the field, because no one's going to be over there, because defense is going to know exactly what they're trying to do.
They know exactly what it is, and there's like one read every time, and that's all there is. Like, it's Claypool on a 4-yard out. So
I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's I was a little bit hard on Pickett this game, and I think he'll make strides from here, but coordinator, he needs to help him out a little bit. For Trubisky, I give him an A-. I think it was a good performance.
It was.
Nothing to knock really at all. I mean, on 3rd and long, you are throwing to the sticks. That's what I want every quarterback to do on 3rd and long. You do not play to check the ball down like we've seen with Mason Rudolph, or even Ben in old Ben in the past. Don't live to check the ball down. Throw to the sticks on 3rd down. Move the chains, and it's because they were able to chew up 4 minutes and 38 seconds off the clock at the end that Tom Brady didn't have a chance to get the ball back. And so I was really impressed with what he was able to do. Having said that, this is where people need to put this to bed right now. Trubisky's in year 6. He's in year 6, and we saw a 3.5 game sample of poor play from Trubisky prior to his benching. And so they just need to stop with the Trubisky needs to be the starter thing. I don't think it's good for I don't think it's good for anybody moving forward. I mean, Pickett's your guy. He has to be your guy. You got to work with them. I got to be quite frank here. I don't think either one of these quarterbacks are winning the Super Bowl this year. Sadly, if you're an optimist, I hate to burst your bubble, and maybe they'll, I don't know, pull out something miraculous here. And if that's the case, then you need to go with the guy you picked in the 1st round and not delay that process another year or 2 years down the line. So, all right, we're going to skip the biggest takeaways, Shane, because we're running a little bit behind today. Let's go to our next. Let's go to our next discussion topic. Steelers never had a real quarterback controversy, which is what's leading right one into the other. So I want to talk about this bizarre, and I don't know how else to describe it. A few weeks after the fact, like this Jets game was week 4. We're entering week 7 now. But just earlier this week, Jerry Dulett came out with a report that said that there was an altercation between Mitch Trubisky and Deontay Johnson in the locker room. That report was backed up by Ron Cook, also of the Post-Gazette. And they were saying that this altercation happened. Not only are they saying that it happened, but they think that it resulted in Trubisky being benched at halftime of the Jets game. Shane, was Trubisky benched at halftime because of an altercation with Deontay Johnson?
So I'm going to say pretty confidently that that's not the case, mostly because if you've watched football for a long time and you've really delved in the NFL and you know how it works, stuff happens in the locker room, right? We know that it does. We know fights break out, arguments happen, guys are heated. The Steelers are in the midst of losing a lot of games. They're not used to this. Like, things are going to get said. People are going to get mad. I don't know what he would have had to say to get benched, but I doubt Trubisky said whatever it would have taken to actually be told he's sitting down. I don't think it had really much, if anything, to do with it. I think Tomlin saw the way the offense was going and decided, hey, probably should have done this to begin with, but we're going to go with Pickett in the second half and see if we can get something going. That's what I do believe happened. I don't see that being anything else other than that decision being made. If it is, then again, I'd really like to know what Trubisky said, because he had to say something. Let me put it this way. If he said something that was bad enough to lose his job at halftime, he probably shouldn't be on the football team right now. Like, he probably wouldn't be on it. They'd either have cut him if it's that bad, or he'd be on another football team right now. Like,
yep,
a conditional 7th round pick or whatever they had to take to get rid of him. That's the type of stuff that gets you benched. Anything other than that, I can't imagine had much to do with it.
Yeah, look, we're not doubting that the altercation took place.
Right, I think
it seemed like it got leaked. When Brooke Pryor asked Tomlin about it, he did not confirm nor deny that it happened. He said sometimes things get heated, which to me kind of sounds like, yeah, it happened, but I don't want to talk about it. But to think that that's the reason why you bench your starting quarterback is because he got into an argument with his receiver, who, by the way, during that game had a ball bounce right off of his hands into the hands of the defender. So if anybody had a right to get mad in that game, I think it was Trubisky. So not only that, but he also had a really nice pass. It would have been a really tough catch for Johnson, but right in the back of the end zone, that toe was right on the line. And so things didn't quite go according to plan for those two guys. But to think that you bench your starting quarterback for that reason is insane to me. It wasn't because of that. It was because Trubisky averaged 5.6 yards per attempt in his first 3.5 games and had 6 points at halftime of the Jets game, which 3 of which came on a penalty right before the half. They got a roughing call and put him in field goal range. So there would have only been 3 points in that half. And so you understand why the switch had to be made. I mean, they have the 20th overall pick waiting in the wings for an opportunity. And like we said, it wasn't our favorite timing. We would have done beginning of the year, Jets game with 10 days to prepare, or after the week 9 bye. That Tomlin chose none of those things. He chose to go with Pickett at halftime, but is what it is. But I just not buying that is the reason why Trubisky was benched for Pickett. It's not because he got in an argument. So I'm going to lean towards the negative on that one. Let's talk about Tomlin shutting down that controversy a little bit. Tomlin had his weekly press conference on Tuesday, and he essentially said, look, when Kenny Pickett is healthy, he's the guy. I mean, I was not surprised by the statement, but believe it or not, there's a fan group out there that was arguing with me this week on social media saying that Trubisky needs to be that guy. What do you think?
So the problem with this whole thing, I touched on a little bit before. I knew that as soon as Trubisky played well, right? As soon as he started hitting those passes and when he won the game, I knew for a fact that I was going to go on Twitter after the game, the next day, leading up to this game, until we know who the starter is going to be based on concussion protocol and everything. I knew there was going to be people who have a lot of sway in the community even saying that, hey, Trubisky needs to be the guy and this stuff. And the whole problem with it is I think all Steelers fans have the same mentality of like, we need to win at all costs, right? They have that mentality of like, we have to do what's best for the team in this particular moment. That's even if Trubisky could play like he did in the second half of that game, every game. This team is not a playoff contending football team. It is not a Super Bowl contending playoff team. It just isn't. Even if he plays that well every single game the rest of the way, we're just not as talented as some other teams that are going to be ahead of us in the standings and ahead of us in power rankings, all this stuff. That's just not going to get it done. Why would you bother playing a guy who is in his 6th season, who has not shown enough improvement from year to year to think that he's all of a sudden going to even take like a Ryan Tannehill-esque leap? Like if he had done something like that, that's great. They get you like a playoff caliber quarterback-ish. But that's probably the best case scenario when you have a guy you just drafted in the first round in a season where you're probably not going anywhere. This is the time to figure out more about him, give him all the reps he can. You have to build for the future at some point, and this team has been so reluctant to do so. At the very least, they have to make the right decision with the quarterback, if nothing else.
Now, this team right now, entering week 7, Steelers are 30th in points per game. They're 29th in yards per game. They're 32nd in points per play, 28th in time of possession, 26th in first downs per play, 28th in yards per rush, 31st in yards per pass, 24th in DVOA offense. This is just a bad offense overall. And most of that still has come with Mitch Trubisky at the helm. And so I don't understand a reason why we think that we're suddenly going to have success. Everything is like hindsight 2020. It's so short-sighted. Like, yes, Trubisky, I'm willing to admit, and I've gone on record admitting, Trubisky had the best half of play that we've seen from a Steelers quarterback this year.
Yeah,
and probably even going back to at some point last year. I'd have to go back and see.
Yeah.
But we should not expect Trubisky, if he was named the starter, to be able to repeat that or to say, this is the guy we're getting moving forward. We're going to get the guy that averages 13 yards an attempt and the guy that goes and leads us and has the clock management and the big third down conversions. That's just not who Trubisky is. He's in his 6th season in the NFL, and we've seen at this point, it's not reasonable to expect that. So yes, he did have good play, but at the same time, fans who really want what's best for the future of this team, they should be wanting Pickett to play. So why don't you hit our next slide there, Shane? And Pickett is the right choice. I mean, I think we would both agree on that. I think it'd be hard pressed to find people in this line of business that do the research that we do that don't agree with that, because this is the guy you drafted. You need to find out who he is. I was on a lengthy phone conversation the other day talking about this exact same thing with an NFL writer. And what I'm deathly afraid of this year, Shane, is that the Steelers are going to go the rest of the 2022 season, and we are not going to learn a thing about Kenny Pickett. Even if Pickett is named that guy, just because I feel like he's going to be so hamstrung by Matt Canada's offense that it's going to delay this process even further. And we're going to be looking another year down the line. Do we have that guy? They need to figure that out. And so not only does Pickett need to start, obviously, for that to happen, when healthy, obviously we don't want to risk his health, just like the Dolphins don't want to risk his health if he's not ready to play, and he was cleared this week. So he's good to go. But when healthy, Pickett needs to be the guy. You do not go backwards. And I said that for a couple of reasons. The first reason was because it's not worth risking the confidence or shaking the development of your quarterback. And people are going to say, that's hogwash. He's a man. He can deal with it. True, he probably can. But we've seen quarterbacks get their confidence rattled, even good quarterbacks. So even looking at like Justin Herbert this year, like Herbert has taken a step in the wrong direction, and his offensive line is not as good. And so you can see it happen even with better players, better prospects. We don't want that for Pickett. Like, why put him in a situation where he even has to think about this? Like, am I going to go out there and now do I need to be really conservative and not try to make risky throws or whatever, so I don't lose my job? Like, you don't want him to start thinking that way. And then the second reason is because he's the guy that you drafted. He's the guy that you know is going to get that shot anyway. Why prolong the inevitable with a stopgap journeyman quarterback? I just don't get it. And so that's my take on that.
I agree with everything you said. I think the problem with this is you do have to wonder how much they're actually going to know about Kenny by the end of the year, because so much of what he does well is not being emphasized in the offense, right? We talked about that earlier, like using the middle of the field, extending plays, throwing the ball down the field. Like, none of that is happening right now. And I think at some point, and whether it's him doing it himself or, Tomlin going to him and saying, listen, we're not going to make a change in the middle of the year because we don't want to have to shake everything up, but you go out there and make the plays that you know you can make, and you make it happen. Like, give him the ability to say, you know what, I know Canada called this, or the design is this. You make something happen, like, because the offense needs something, and it's going to have to come down to him, kind of just deciding, hey, you know what, I know that this play was designed to go here or whatever else, but this play isn't going to work, so I'm going to do something else. Like, I think that's what has to happen, and if he can show that, even some of that stuff, right? that I think is enough to give him and the rest of the team confidence that with a better offensive scheme, with something that hopefully can be more tied to his strengths moving forward, he can be at least the guy for the foreseeable future, opposed to wondering, will he be the guy for the next, even 2 years, if nothing else.
Yeah, I'm hoping we find out something soon. Like we
Right.
just need to see, because we've learned nothing so far, and he is so captain that offense right now. So, all right, let's go ahead and make an announcement. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all your support. Shane, let's talk about the Steelers versus Dolphins this week. The Steelers were able to avoid the dreaded 1-5 start to the season. They're 2-4. Remarkably, 2-4 puts them just one game back in the lead for the AFC North, which I would not have predicted at this point, considering having Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson, a couple strong teams in that conference, obviously in that division, Obviously, Watson's not there yet, but we'll see if the Browns are in any shape to compete by the time that he comes back. But I did not think that 2-4 would be one game back of the division. And depending on how things go for these other teams in the AFC North this week, the Steelers could be right there in the hunt. And so lots of different ways that you could root for the Steelers team. And I'm not going to fault anybody who wants to root anyway. I understand it all. Like I said, I'm very much a realist this way, and I don't think the Steelers are going to win a Super Bowl this year, and in large part because their offense is a bottom 3 offense in the NFL. It's just not going to get it done against Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, whoever you're going to have to go against in the playoffs. But crazier things have happened, and so I'm perfectly fine with the optimistic take as well. So let's talk about the Steelers-Dolphins this week. Steelers are 7-point underdogs right now. It'll be the 3rd week in a row the Steelers have been at least a touchdown underdog. Last week they were 9.5. They were huge underdogs against the Bills. I think it finished like 14 points.
I think it was an even 14.
It's outrageous. Yeah. So 7-point underdogs. How do you feel about that line?
I think it's a little rich just because of the way that the Dolphins defense has played for a lot of the season. I think that they are a defense that isn't going to be guaranteed to stop even our offense from scoring at least close to that 20-point mark or more. And I know Tua is back, and I think that gives him a bump, but he still is in his first game back after missing several weeks. And, I hope obviously that he is truly ready to play. It seems like he is, but if he's fully healthy, then it makes a little bit more sense. And if he had been playing this whole time, but with him missing time and the fact that the defense for them has not been that great, I think it should be close to like a 3 or 4 point, underdog for the Steelers. Especially even if Trubisky has to start, if he can keep it going a little bit and keep that hot start from last week, maybe it probably should be a little bit lower than that.
Yeah, I agree with you too. I think this line should be a little bit closer than what it is. I think the Dolphins should be favored, but I think it should be a little bit closer. Yeah. And whether it's not going to play a factor like it did early in the season. Like everybody's posting those pictures like it was 120 degrees.
I can't stand that. So it's crazy.
No, I can understand like at some point it can be an advantage. And then you're baking in that sideline, the other sideline's 85 degrees or whatever. That doesn't seem quite fair, whatever. But this game it's supposed to be like 74 degrees and potentially rainy even. And so it's like it's not that big of a weather advantage or anything for Miami like they have with the heat and all that. But I do think the line should be a little bit closer. This defense just has not been good for Miami at all. And they're on a 3-game losing streak, which is something to note as well. They are getting Tua back. And so I think that's a big factor that we're going to talk about. But I think for the most part, it's reasonable to think this should be, I would say even closer to a pick 'em than it is a 7-point spread.
Yeah, I would say so.
That's kind of my thoughts on that. So let's go ahead and talk about the injuries real quick. And we always do this show on Wednesday, and so we don't know much at this point. It's kind of a little bit of speculation here on our part. But we do know the Steelers were missing 4/5 of their nickel secondary last week, including their top 3 cornerbacks, Kella Witherspoon, Cam Sutton, Levi Wallace, and Minkah Fitzpatrick. They're all pro safety, and so that always plays a big factor, obviously. I don't know where Witherspoon is and track with his hamstring injury. It had to have been pretty severe if he wasn't able to practice for 2 straight weeks with that. Yeah. So we'll see if he's able to practice at all this week. But it sounds like the other ones could be making a return this week, if I'm not mistaken. Do you have any thoughts on the injuries so far, Shane?
Honestly, like I said, kind of because when we do the show, it can be a little bit difficult to determine where people are on track to play. But I do feel like it's pretty likely, based on what we were hearing last week with the injuries to the secondary, that everyone except Witherspoon has a decent chance to suit up. I don't know how truly healthy they'll be. If they do suit up, it might be a situation where maybe, you still have Pierre play a good amount of snaps, and maybe even Josh Jackson stays up, maybe even. Like, we'll have to see about that. But realistically, the way that the team played last week, I'm not super concerned about it in the secondary, because even if we have all those guys back there, it's really going to come down to the front seven making plays, because and we'll talk about it with the matchup. We just don't match up with these receivers regardless of who's out there.
Yeah, two other injuries to note real quick. Pat Freiermuth missed last week with a concussion. It was his third concussion in 2 years, so it's getting at that level where it's becoming a little bit concerning. The Steelers definitely want to err on the side of caution. I would have to imagine that being another week removed, he's probably going to play this week. But
I would assume. Yeah.
We'll see if he ends up clearing that. And then one on the Dolphins side as well, left tackle Teron Armstead. And this is a good football player. And if he's not able to go for this one, it could really benefit the Steelers that way, and Highsmith could really get a favorable matchup over there. I think that he's probably going to be in the clear to play, but keep an eye out on the rest of the official injury report coming up this week. Let's talk about the matchups, Shane, in this one. A couple big ones to highlight. And I think the biggest one that we're all scared to death about is Steelers cornerbacks, which, again, haven't been healthy. Again, the backups were surprising last week, but Steelers cornerbacks, who maybe 2 or 3 coming back from injury this week, against Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. This receiver team, on paper, is the fastest duo of receivers we've seen. I mean, these guys have
it might be the fastest in the history of the sport.
It might be. Tyreek Hill is just untouchable. Tyreek Hill is the number 1 rated wide receiver right now on Pro Football Focus. And so let me throw another stat out here. I did this one a few weeks back when the Steelers were just atrocious. After week 3, the Steelers receivers had 25 yards after the catch, which was just a stat that makes you want to vomit, because it shows how bad and poorly designed the offense is. Yeah. Now, this week, heading into week 7, the Steelers' entire offense, running backs, tight ends, receivers, we're up to 481 yards after the catch this year. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle alone, those 2 guys, 487 yards after the catch. And so those 2 guys on this team have more yards after the catch than the entire Steelers team combined. They are scary with the ball in their hands, and you have to account for their speed. And so I think that is a crucial matchup that we have to watch this week.
And that's why I mentioned, like, as much as I hope that the secondary is a lot healthier, I don't know how much of a difference it makes, because, I mean, if you talk about, like, the perfect receiver for James Pierre to cover last week, Mike Evans, the exact opposite of that is Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. He is not going to check either of those guys, and maybe not even 5 yards down the field, let alone 30. Right? Like, it's just not going to happen. It's going to come down to them really being creative with how they, try to cover the space that those guys can cover. Like, how do you try to keep them boxed into a certain degree, and at least make sure that if they are going to get big chunk plays, or not scoring on them or getting the 50, 60-yard touchdowns, like, that has to be kind of the game plan, and hoping that Tua throws you a couple, because he will do that. He still is a quarterback that will sometimes stretch his arm a little bit too much, because he doesn't have much arm strength there, especially coming back. I think he wants to make a big splash. You have to catch anything he gives you, basically. Like, that has to be a big point of emphasis, is making sure you take advantage of any opportunities you get.
Yeah, that one I'm scared to death about. And I really hope that Witherspoon can play this week, because, again, he's the only
He at least has some speed to deal with him.
He has some speed, and he's got great size, but the other guys don't really have either. I mean,
no, not really. No,
James Pierre and Wallace have average size and well below average speed, and it's just terrifying matchup this week. I don't know how else to put it, but you can't have a worse matchup when you're talking about the fastest receiving core against the slowest cornerbacks in the NFL. So I'm worried to see how that one goes. I think they're going to have to be aided a lot by Minka and Edmonds. Like, I don't know if Edmonds is going to be able to play as close to the box this game, probably because he's going to have to. They're going to have to play like deep cover 2 probably against this Dolphins offense in order to keep those guys in check. So we'll see how that goes. The next matchup that I want to highlight is one that certainly favors the Steelers, and I'm hoping it can give them a kind of a competitive advantage here. And that's Cam Hayward going up against left guard Liam Eichenberg of the Dolphins, who has not been fantastic despite being a former 2nd-round pick. Eichenberg has kind of been all over the place. Couldn't play at tackle, just not quick enough feet for that. At guard, he's getting bulldozed a little bit. He's not grading out well at all. And so Hayward is already coming off a very strong game, maybe his best of the year against the Bucs. I would love to be able to see him and even Ogunjobi exploit these matchups against the guards this week because the Dolphins' offensive line is just not very good right now. And so that's one. If the pressure comes from somewhere, I'd love it to be able to come right up the gut from Hayward against Eichenberg.
Yeah, you have to move Tua off a spot because if he's in rhythm and the way this offense is designed, if he can hit some of the deep digs and some of the other stuff that they're running that are getting these guys open in the middle of the field, it's just so hard to cover that, especially with the guys we have out there trying to run with these players. You have to move him off a spot, make him run to the sidelines. That way, all he has to do is try to hit guys on the sideline where there isn't run after catch, opportunity, really, stuff like that. That has to be a big emphasis because if you get him off the edge, obviously that's great. But if he has the ability to step up in the pocket because the pocket's not getting compressed, he's going to be able to find guys down the middle of the field and even deep down the middle. He's shown that ability several times this year. So that's got to be where the pressure comes from for sure.
Yeah, and I talked about Highsmith versus Teron Armstead this week. I think that'll be a good battle. I mean, Highsmith leads the league in sacks, but his win rate needs to go up a little bit. I feel like still he's doing a good job without TJ Watt.
He's definitely having a good season for sure.
Nobody should be complaining about him because I don't think Malik Reed has helped him hardly at all on the other side, and he really can't come off the field because the depth is so bad. And so a lot of props to Highsmith. That's going to be a guy that we're going to be talking about soon for a big contract. I just did the math today, and he's on the pace for close to 18.5 sacks, which would be like Robert Quinn level stuff from the previous year. So he's going to get a payday. I don't know if he'll be able to keep up at that pace, especially when Watt comes back and he's kind of stealing some of that production as well. But Highsmith off to, again, a breakout year. What's very interesting right now is the Dolphins do not have another backup tackle available, which makes me think that Armstead is going to be available to play this week. Otherwise, they would have made some sort of preemptive move to get a guy in there. Yeah, because Greg Little is already in for Austin Jackson at right tackle, and so there's nobody else. I don't know what they would do. So I think that Armstead is going to play, but that's another matchup to keep an eye on. If Highsmith can get the best of him, and Hayward, we would expect to win his matchup. They could collapse that pocket against Tua, which would be very helpful. Last one I want to talk about, and then we'll see if we got any more here. Steelers offensive tackles get a kind of a revenge match here against Melvin Ingram. And you're going to believe that Ingram's going to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder for how the way that things went down. And maybe Steelers and Mike Tomlin will as well, from the way that he kind of forced his way out the door before the trade deadline last year. Ingram's off to a pretty good start this year. Nothing spectacular, but he has made some splash plays. I think he scooped up one for a score. He's been in the backfield a lot. And so we want to see Dan Moore do his job and be able to kind of wash Ingram from this game. We don't want Ingram to be a huge factor for multiple reasons, because we don't want him to stick it to us.
Yeah, we'll
this
hear
guy
about
that
it then,
didn't leave on good terms. I know we would certainly hear about it. And so that's another matchup I look for, hopefully some success there. And I'm hoping that it doesn't require a lot of chipping and everything on that side, and hopefully Moore can more or less do it by himself, and they'll move Ingram around a little bit as well. Did you have any other, Shane, that you want to talk about?
Major ones, not really. I mean, those are the ones that I think are going to make or break the game. Anything else is just kind of, going to be circumstantial, I would say. So.
Okay. So let's talk about what we can expect from Steelers play versus Dolphins. It's hard to know what we can expect when we don't know for sure which quarterback is going to be out there. But like Tomlin pointed to, if Pickett is healthy and cleared, he is the guy. And so I think we more or less just have to look at the way that this Dolphins defense is operating right now. The Steelers should be able to find success against them, theoretically. Now, we're talking about a really bad offense too, but the Dolphins have lost 3 straight games, and a lot of that has been due to their defense. Their corners are not playing well. And despite their investments right now, they've got 2 guys injured, and Xavier Howard is not having that great year right now. He's kind of been hampered with a hamstring. And Byron Jones is out. And so that's another big loss for them. They're missing their slot corner. So the Steelers should be able to exploit this Dolphins defense through the air. And I want to look for it to happen. Like, can we get a full game and not just a half from Trubisky, but a full game of where we can like routinely chunk off plays over the middle of the field and finish with like 8.5, 9 yards an attempt. Like, this would be the game to do it. I think this is going to be a real test for either Pickett or Trubisky. If Pickett ends up being healthy, he's that guy.
Yeah, I think you talked about Xavier Howard. I mean, he's been a premier corner for several years now, especially taking the football away. He's been very good at that, more so than anything else. But they're just asking so much of him with guys injured that I think combined with him being limited with the hamstring, like you said, it's just too much. I think that if you can isolate him a lot on either Pickens or Deontay Johnson, especially Johnson, if he can play well, because the quickness should be able to get Howard more than just the deep, throws down the field with Pickens. I think he'd be better suited to be targeting, Johnson against him. But in general, like, this offense just needs to create some amount of explosive plays. It has to happen at some point if they want to score more than 17, 20 points. And it hasn't happened yet. I mean, they had the big plays on third down. They had obviously the big play on the broken play to Hayward, but that's been about it this year. I mean, it's taken so much for this team to get anything explosive down the field. And a lot of it has had to be lucky things or, like the Pickens 30-yard crazy catch he made against Browns, like stuff like it's been so difficult. It never looks easy. Whereas the Dolphins this year, when they've created big plays, it looks easy. Like it looks like it was planned and executed properly. We're just not getting that with Canada's offense right now. So I think it's going to come down to the quarterbacks making things happen themselves, whoever it ends up being. And I think you saw some of that with, last week with Trubisky, especially down the stretch. So hopefully, even if it's him, he can create some big chunk plays that way.
Yeah, so we're hoping whoever is that guy this week, and we hope that Pickett is healthy. We want to see him out there.
Yeah.
But we want to be able to exploit the middle of the field. Exploit the middle of the field.
We have not been able to do.
I know something's got to change. And like I said, I am all in favor. If I'm the Steelers and I'm Mike Tomlin, I'm overruling Canada a little bit, and I'm saying, let's go to Pickett. Let's ask him about 5 or 6 or 7 plays that he'd like to use at Pitt, and let's try to utilize that, because I don't think that his skill set is being utilized at all. I think the middle of the field is where he thrived during his senior year. It's what helped lead to 42 touchdown pass, 43. I can't remember now. 42 or 43 touchdown passes, and led to an ACC championship. And so that's what they need to try to do. Whether or not they'll be able to do that, we'll see. This is their good test, though. The secondary is weak right now, and so hopefully they can exploit that with some good young receivers this week. Let's talk about our key to success before we get to our predictions here. You want to go first, Shane?
Yeah, I think the key to success, I think in general, is you have to understand that this offense, its identity is to get the ball in the hands of the receivers that they've brought in over the past 2 years. You look at Tyreek Hill, obviously leading the league in receiving, Jalen Waddle 5th, having 2 receivers in the top 5 tells you exactly what they're trying to do offensively, right? Even without 2 out there, when they've had Bridgewater, even Skylar Thompson, like they've tried to get the football to these guys because they know that even if it's a 5-yard play or an 8-yard play, it could become an 80-yard play with these guys. That's what you have to understand. You have to game plan around the fact that there's going to be space for them to find. Make sure that you tackle well, that you rally to the football. Do not let them break off those 40, 50-yard chunk plays when Tua only has to throw it 7 or 8 yards. That's going to be how they stop this offense from really just taking the game over like they have a couple times this year.
Yeah, I agree with that one for sure. My key to success for this game is you cannot come into this contest underestimating Tua. Like, I've been hard on Tua in the past. He was looking phenomenal those first few games. And again, I know he's aided a lot by his receivers and the yards after the catch stuff. I can't take away from his performance. These last 3 games, and so Tua did play a little bit against the Bengals before getting injured, 39% of the snaps, I think.
Yeah, that was a little rough for him. But outside of that game, he's been phenomenal.
But if we're looking at this last 3-game sample, the Dolphins have averaged 16 points a game. They were averaging almost 28 points a game with Tua before that. And not only that, if you remember back to week 2, Tua had 461 yards and 6 touchdowns. So in that game against the Ravens. And so he has the capability of chewing you up. And this team was incredibly successful. They had the number 1 DVOA offense in those first 3 games prior to getting that concussion in week 4. And so I think that the Steelers need to know that. They need a game plan specifically for him. And he doesn't have the biggest arm, but he can still hit his receivers in stride on patterns, and he's accurate. And so I think the key is going to be, you've got to get after him. You got to make him uncomfortable. I don't want to see the guy get hurt again. I really don't. I'm rooting for his health, because that last concussion was really scary. And so it was. You never like to see that at all. And so I certainly don't want Steelers to hammer him that way, but I want him to get flustered. I want him to get very uncomfortable in the pocket. And if the Steelers are able to do that, then maybe the Dolphins offense will look more or less like it did with Bridgewater and Skylar Thompson these last couple of games, rather than with like it did with Tua in the first couple of games where they were outstanding. And so I think that that's a huge factor this week. Don't let him get comfortable.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to our predictions. Go ahead.
I was just going to mention, I think it's part of why when I mentioned before, you have to tackle well on these short plays, make him frustrated that they're not getting chunk plays, make him throw the ball down the field to you because he will do that. And if he's late even a little bit, Minka, if he's healthy, or Edmonds, they can make plays on the football. Like, he's going to give you opportunities, and you just need to win those when he gives them to you.
And on that note, Shane, Steelers tackling was fantastic against the Bucs. One of the best I've ever seen it. Like, their missed tackle rate was incredibly low. And that's exactly what you want. So they're going to have a real task on their hands because
for sure.
there's going to be guys diving to try to touch Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle.
Unfortunately,
and I can't imagine the same level of success this week, but if they can do anything similar, that'd be a huge win with these guys who are the best in the NFL after the catch statistically so far this season. Let's get to our predictions before we sign off for today. Steelers versus Dolphins, huge game for Steelers. Mike Tomlin knows it. You don't want to drop to 2-5 on the season. That's going to, it won't eliminate you, but it certainly hurts your chances. Whereas you can get to 3-4, you could potentially, depending on how things go with the Bengals and the Ravens, you could be sitting tied for the division lead.
Which is just crazy to think about.
It's crazy to think about. So how do you see this game, this game going for the Steelers, Shane?
So I do have Dolphins winning this game. I do think that they're just right now a better overall team with Tua starting if he's healthy. I think that the defense obviously has struggled, but this is an offense for the Steelers that has yet to prove to me that they can consistently put up points or yards. And even this past week, they barely got it done, and it took some spectacular plays. I have Dolphins winning 28-24. I think we're going to have our highest point total of the year with the 24 points. I think the offense will be significantly better than it's been on average so far against a beat-up Dolphins team. But I think the Dolphins will score just enough points. I think that their offense is just really hard to stop unless you're perfect. And as long as Tua is making the right decisions and he's healthy, I don't see us really being able to limit them enough to come away with a win.
Yeah, I'm with you there, unfortunately. And I've been wrong in my predictions, so I hope I'm wrong again.
This is a moment where I'm fine with being wrong.
Yeah, it's been a little bit backwards, honestly, this year. So I've got the Dolphins winning 23-20. I think that Steelers get to that 20-point hump against this defense that's been a little bit weak. But I also think it's just going to be really hard to contain these guys. Now, listen, this is one of those games where I genuinely feel like if TJ Watt was playing, that could swing the game in their favor. Like it might not be like in the actual like Vegas like betting odds, it might not do it. But Watt going up against Greg Little, I mean, he would just dominate that matchup. Like this could be like one of those 3-sack, forced fumble games from TJ Watt where he just takes over and then the pocket just collapses routinely on him. Without Watt, I think the Steelers should be able to still get some pressure better than they have in previous weeks. But I don't know if it'll be enough if Tua gets the ball out quickly and accurately. And so I've got the Dolphins winning 23-20. In terms of point total, I'm just under the point total. Shane is just over. I don't like betting the points this week because I honestly don't know how to go. Like I can see the Dolphins getting a few explosive plays and a couple of huge touchdowns, but
I saw a stat. I saw a tweet earlier this week from I forget who it was. I don't think I know them specifically, but they said that if you were to bet $100 on every single under throughout the entire season up to this point, you would be up $1,500 right now.
Oh. That is interesting. Yeah, I know. It's kind of way it's played. Like you can kind of tell it makes sense because
offenses down
have not played very well this year.
Yeah, it's down this year. So
that's something interesting to note if you're a betting person there. Shane and I both have the Dolphins, unfortunately, winning this game. We'll see if that ends up being the case or not. But we do think that it's going to be a close game and pretty good contest for Sunday Night Football action. All right. Thank you for joining us today on the show. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts and also check us out on YouTube. Thanks for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.